Автомашин үйлдвэрлэл борлуулалтаараа дэлхийд тэргүүлэгч Land Rover компани 1948 оноос үйл ажиллагаагаа эхлүүлсэн. Тус компани зах зээл нийлүүлдэг Range Rover загварууд бол тансаг, тав тухтайн дээр дэвшилтэт технологиудыг ч өөртөө багтаасан байдаг. Та яг одоо 4-р үеийн Range Rover Supercharged-ыг харж байна. Энэ загвар хэрэглэгчдээс тав тухтай, спортлог, туулах чадвар сайн гэсэн үнэлгээнүүдийг авч байсан загвар юм. Дэлхийн хамгийн тав тухтай том SUV автомашинуудаас Range Rover автомашин 3 жигсдэг. Харин энэ дугаарын зочид бол уурхай хүнд үйлдвэрийн дэд сайд О.Батнайрамдал. AmCham Mongolia-ийн ТУЗ-ийн дарга Жеймс Лиотта юм.
Tell me about yourself. So where are you from?
Well, I grew up in the state of West Virginia, but grew up there. Graduated from Buchanan Upshur High School. I think our graduating class was 230 people, so very small town.
Very small town, small
a some or a bog. You can call it whatever,
Yeah.
whatever you want with that. But graduated from there, and then went to the American University in Washington D.C.
Oh, okay.
For my undergrad, and majored in political science and law and society, so I did a double major. And then I have a legal master's degree in Chinese law from Tsinghua University in China, so I did all of that in Beijing.
That's interesting.
And then I've got my doctorate, my Juris Doctorate degree in jurisprudence law, and I did that at West Virginia University, where I grew up.
Okay.
And so, but I did 2/3 of those credit hours almost out of country. So I was in Russia.
Very much in East Coast.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
Now, how about you?
Well, I was born and raised in Hoft.
Oh wow, that's fantastic.
It's a capital of Hoft province in far western Mongolia.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of the kind of cities that I've lived through, I guess in the last 20 years or so, probably the smallest town I've ever been to, and then I found my way to study in the capital city in a senior high school.
Oh, nice.
With a generous scholarship.
Yeah.
That was the only way actually I could, move to the next level. Really.
Yeah.
Given how much my parents could afford for my education.
Sure.
And then I spent 3 years in the capital city,
Okay.
Ulaanbaatar, and I still actually don't know much, Ulaanbaatar very well, and not every corner. Like, once I'm out of the city center, actually, I get lost.
It's changing so rapidly now. Anyway,
at the same time, it changes so fast.
Yeah.
And then I got another scholarship to study in Norway in a senior high school, and then that's where actually I figured out you could actually study in the U.S. if you qualify, only if you qualify, right? And then that's where I applied to Macalester College in the U.S. and then I got a full ride to study at Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Yes, wow.
So I spent 4 years in Minnesota.
St. Paul, Minnesota.
So, yeah. And I thought St. Paul, the Twin Cities, right?
Yes.
St. Paul and Minneapolis were really the heart of the U.S. Until I figured out there's a city called San Francisco and New York.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tell me a minute. Then how did you end up at Harvard? How did that work?
So in order to get the job on Wall Street, you know how much it requires, how competitive that is. I mean, so I had to get an MBA in a top school basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I couldn't tell the difference among many business schools. I looked at the top 10 schools. It was really hard to differentiate just from looking at the information from websites. So I decided to apply top 4 schools. That was a kind of stupid thing to do, to be honest. So I applied to Stanford, graduate school of business, and then Harvard Business School, and Wharton, and Chicago Booth.
Oh wow!
So I got into Wharton and Harvard. I got waitlisted in Chicago and rejected from Stanford. So the result was actually much better than I expected.
50% is fantastic.
Yeah.
Even 1% amongst those schools. I mean, those are top tier schools.
Yeah. So do you read books, or what's your hobby?
I'm more of a movie watcher than a book reader.
Okay.
I've never been a huge reader, but that's funny because I'm a lawyer and that's what I do all the time. It's read contracts and just read, right? And so maybe because at work I'm reading all the time, when I get home I want to just sit down with the kids or flip on a movie or something like that along those.
I have this question. So you pretty much spent half of your life in Mongolia. So what brought you to Mongolia?
So originally as a Peace Corps volunteer.
When was that?
That was 2000.
2000.
So that's 22 years ago. When I arrived, I was 21.
When I was a high school student.
Yeah. So it was quite an experience. I was in DC at university, and I was working. I remember during the summer for Senator J. Rockefeller, because he was the senator from West Virginia. And I was sitting there in a cubicle, kind of typing away because we had to do research. And it just kind of hit me that I'm not ready for this. I don't want to sit in a cubicle right now. I want to get out and do more.
Explore.
I need something to challenge
Adventure.
me. So I applied for the Peace Corps, and then I sat in this room, and they said, okay, Mr. Liotta, we're going to send you to Africa. I was like, oh, Africa. I said, that'd be a unique experience, but the Peace Corps kind of sends everybody to Africa, it seems like. Is there another place I could go? And they said, well, we don't let you pick, but if there was a region. I said, well, I've never been to Asia. And so I said, how about Asia? And they said, oh, there's this place. It's cold, dark. And a lot of the volunteers quit early. And it's called Mongolia. Would you be willing to go there? And I just said, sure. I know nothing really about Mongolia. Throw me in. I'd love to do this. And of course, growing up in history class, we learned about, as we call him, Genghis Khan. And so that was the only thing I had really known and was fascinated about. And then, a month later, I was here.
Wow.
So that was the journey to here, and ever since, I would say Mongolia is as much home as America is. In fact, I have reverse culture shock when I go back to the U.S. now. I remember when I came to Mongolia as a Peace Corps volunteer, my primary assignment was teaching English to 5th through 10th graders out in Overhangai in Arvahir. And we did other stuff. We built chicken farms and community development stuff as well. But I remember when I first got here, you still had the plaque on the wall above the chalkboard with quotes from Lenin. And you'd see these Lenin quotes above there. And coming from America, where we have that kind of education system where you're taught to be unique or be different or do your own style or your own way, that was interesting to me because the students were so intelligent and so wonderful. But I think the education system at that time, this was 22 years ago in Mongolia, at that time was more of this you're told and you repeat type of education system.
So when I was in Australia, so I did this little project, sort of side gig project, So especially, I guess, when you're an investment banker, it's you pulling long hours. And then you work 7 days a week. And it's crazy, right? But there were two friends of mine, both full-time management consultant and commodity trader in Tokyo. And then three of us started a little project called Unlock Podcast. So the reason we wanted to do Unlock Podcast was just to share whatever we learn in reading in a book with fellow Mongolians. Basically just record what we learn in a very simple conversation in Mongolian, and then just upload it on a podcast platform where Mongolian kids actually can just tune in and learn about the concepts of whatever we read in a book. So we started in 2017, about 5 years ago, and so we basically we read non-fiction bestseller in every 2 weeks, and then just release an episode on a bi-weekly basis. And before you know it, I guess in 5 years we have covered almost 140 books.
That's incredible.
In 146 episodes.
And it's in the Mongolian language, right?
In the Mongolian language,
So it really opens up even for those who don't speak English here, which an incredible amount of people speak English here. But a lot don't, right? And so that's
because the whole idea is like everyone has a smartphone, so they can actually download podcasts for free. And but there are many kids who cannot afford to buy books, and but in 5 years, so we have got listeners tuning in from 21 kids from 21 provinces, and can you imagine 60 different countries too? The Mongolian diaspora living abroad in 60 different countries, including some of the countries in Africa, like including South Africa. It kind of gives you the statistics where actually Mongolians are spread throughout the world. It's interesting.
Yeah,
because I think this country has got a lot of potential, but not just in resources. No, it's actually the best potential Mongolia has is actually in its youth mind.
Yes.
Yeah.
So based on your experience, what advice would you give to Mongolian kids?
I come from very humble background. Well, I never had huge or larger than life kind of ambition, but I had a set of my own dreams. I wanted to study abroad. I wanted to do well, and so most of the things actually depends on your own effort. So it's you have to find your own drive and what basically makes you get up every morning and do the things that you want to do. And everyone has to figure out your own kind of trigger. And never be afraid of dreaming actually big.
I think not just in Mongolia, but my experience in Ulaanbaatar in the last decade even is there's just so much social pressure on the youth living here. I've got to make a ton of money to try and afford an apartment, which costs more than an apartment in cities in the U.S. I've got to buy this fancy car. I've got to wear these fancy clothes, and there's so much pressure from outside sources that makes them want to do that I think your message is spot on. It's shut out all that noise and really speak with yourself.
That's right. Endogenous and exogenous factors impacting you. But I think, especially as a youth or as a teenager, try to focus on yourself. I want to ask this question from you. Because, growing up in the US, but at the same time spending like 22 years in Mongolia and having experienced through the kind of economic boom and everything, and what basically keeps you in Mongolia? And so because you always have actually choice to go back to your homeland, but you decided to stay, and then what's the trigger there?
Well, I guess first of all I will readily admit that I love the United States. I think it's
your homeland.
A fantastic place, but I love Mongolia too. I guess that's an area where you can love things equally in life. And I think again, I started as a Peace Corps volunteer and teaching 5th through 10th grade, but also living in a ger. I was chopping wood, getting water from the well, and cooking on the ger stove, and just the whole community that comes around that kind of checks in on you. I love countryside people here. I find they're just genuine and sincere heart and wonderful. And I think that's anywhere in the world. If you're in any city, things are a bit more pressurized, even in the U.S. versus out in kind of the countryside of the U.S. But what that leads to, I think, is just my heart being put here as well.
Stayed.
It stayed here. I think Mongolian people are very open and friendly, very welcoming. I'm married into the mob, married a Mongolian woman. She's wondering, once you do that, there you go, right? But again, we still have options. You wouldn't have to be here. And I think when I look at this is where I also get so frustrated too. Whenever it looks like I'm criticizing Mongolia, it comes from that spot of love rather than anger. And yet we can't break through some type of stagnation here to get to the potential this country has.
Yeah.
And so I get so frustrated thinking, everyone deserves better here.
Yeah.
And everybody's been through so much. No one should settle for less. And so I guess I'm still here in a way, aggravated. I can't walk away from it. I still want to be in that fight to say we got to get there.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually great to hear. I mean, I agree that we're all in a fight to bring a better future for this country.
Yeah.
Because I think this country has got a lot of potential, but not just in resources. No, it's actually the best potential Mongolia has is actually in its youth mind.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's the potential we need to unlock to realize.
The people are the most powerful resource here.
Absolutely.
I mean,
I completely agree.
I'm forever the optimist. I think the worst is yet to come, but we'll get through it.
Yeah.
But I think we have to be in the mindset that it's coming.
Especially given, the election is coming up in 2024, not just in the US, also in Mongolia.
Yes.
That sort of dictates the decisions being made and actions being taken.
Yeah. I think that's the wonderful price of democracy. Credit, but everyone always talks about how these big giants on the sides of Mongolia, but they have, and this will be the American in me speaking, they have so much to learn from Mongolia that has freedom of speech and freedom of religion and civil rights. I mean, there's so much here that little Mongolia can teach the rest of the world about what's possible. And to me, those are amazing strengths here that really should, I hope, resonate out to the rest of the world.
I think it's the right choice we have made, and then I think our generation's responsibility is actually to make it even, improvise on it and make the livelihood better.
Well, and that's the good part about Mongolia again, is that opportunity is here. In so many other places in the world, the opportunity is not there for people to actually make change. Here, I mean, you see it every day probably on the smallest and biggest levels of how much access people get and how they put their voices out there and how you've got these opportunities to always shake things up and make change. And sometimes people will say democracies are weak and unstable because elections every 4 years and policies this and that. But in the long run, I think that's how you build a strong society, by having this input to help grow it. And so,
but based on at the same time the mistakes and the failures we have had in the past, how can we actually improvise upon it? How can we do better and then make it, available or have the resource allocation distributed in a fairer way for everyone?
Yeah,
I think that's a kind of a challenge in just the macro terms.
And just the what it takes to do business here and succeed, I think has become a little bit more difficult. I mean, for me, that's the big debate right now in Mongolia, is the crossroads of where our path will go. In terms of democracy, I think that path is here, which is good. The crossroads I sense now in Mongolia are these choices of how free market will we be, how much will we let the private sector lead, versus how much state-owned enterprise, how much planned economy. And to me, at the core of that labor law, the mistake is it needs to all be blown up and redone. It's too focused on this
the socialist path of the past 4 labor laws. It's not free market oriented. It's not freedom of contract oriented.
So I think in the last 30 years, I think that our mining sector has accomplished a lot.
Yeah.
So I think we have got a number of key mining products that we export, and in each category they have become more than $1 billion industry in itself. But I think we are now really trying to move to the next level, where I think we need to start adding values in terms of what we export, and that will create more job opportunities, and that will create more skill set within the economy.
I guess this is if I were to ask the Prime Minister 2 questions, or point out 2 things to the Prime Minister, which I think we have, but I'd like to pick your brain on it as well. One is when the government says it wants investment, and so I think to the Prime Minister or anyone, I would say it would be extremely helpful to clarify what is meant by saying, we want investment. Does that make some sense? Because that's what the private sector is debating now.
I see your point, but for example, in large mega projects, I think for stakeholders, for investors to be comfortable investing in large projects, that actually takes, that requires longer term view. So I think that's where for example, government needs to be able to put whatever, for example, equity commitment that for the project requires. But majority of those, what's clear is that majority of the investment will have to come from abroad, whether that's in equity form or whether that's in debt forms.
Yeah, or is it in companies incorporating here forms,
Sure.
right? And again, I think I can see both sides of it, right? I mean, when the boom was happening and all the foreign companies were coming here, it was a bit overwhelming in the sense of, shaking the earth a bit, of how to kind of move that forward. We hear about a new investment law is coming. We hear about a new minerals law or amendments to the minerals law. I mean, investors are simple. They'll come if there are great incentives, right? If I do business there, will my company make money? That's why they come. That's really what drives them. And so we need to have that legislative ecosystem with robust incentives that encourages people to come here over other jurisdictions. Another thing, since you're in government, another observation that I think the private sector makes is that the government is always very eager to go out into the world to try and draw in that investment. And in the past, with past governments, there's been a sense that it's more about a PR issue. We need to go out and cheerlead in the mineral sector, PDAC. I'll just pick on PDAC, or Hong Kong for investment. But really, instead of going out into the world, what we need to build is success stories in Mongolia. If companies here, the greatest PR for Mongolia is when companies who are already here are going out to the world saying, we're having great success in Mongolia. In fact, that's kind of what happened during the boom, and just the what it takes to do business here and succeed, I think has become a little bit more difficult. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree with that. I think the most importantly, we have to improve the kind of business environment and be supportive in terms of attracting investments and then making the the legal ecosystem for better for all the stakeholders, I should say, not just the investors. There are other participants within the ecosystem as well. I think it needs to be win-win for all of it. So I think that's how the ecosystem actually functions well. But I think at the same time, what Mongolia could have done better is actually making your own voices heard. And because look, I mean, it's very hard to steal the spotlight where there are so many other competitors around the world. So especially when it comes to mining sector, especially when it comes to being a resource-rich country, 2/3 of the world is actually resource-rich.
So now that COVID's over, and we just had a beautiful summer here, and I know we always talk about diversifying the economy. I'll throw you a curveball here, but tourism.
Yeah.
What do you think of the tourism sector here? How can we grow it? How do things fit together with that? What do you see as potential?
Yeah, I think tourism, in my view, is a potential sector that Mongolia has definitely competitive edge, competitive advantage. It's I think one of the kind of priority economic sectors of Mongolia.
Yeah.
And we just need to resolve the bottlenecks, like for example, liberalization in airspace, or for making airspace more competitive and let other competitors get into the business. And then, for example, today we have 5 daily flights to South Korea. I mean that was something we couldn't imagine, for example, like 5 years ago. I mean, I think that's something we need to open up for more. Airlines, to operate to and from Mongolia and be more competitive and bring other, tourists from different parts of the world.
Yeah.
I think especially the countryside of Mongolia, the countryside of Mongolia has got a lot to offer for tourists.
We're working with the U.S. government and the Mongolian government on the Open Skies Agreement to get a direct flight between the United States and Mongolia. Mm-hmm. And it looks like that's finally starting to really, snowball into happening.
Great.
The question will be when, but we're headed in the right direction. Off camera, briefly, you and I were talking, but I'm working on a major Hollywood film project here.
Yeah.
And the idea is to film the entire project in Mongolia, and the benefits to tourism, if the film is successful, the benefits to tourism are astounding. I mean, New Zealand, from what happened with Lord of the Rings, their tourism went through the roof. Mm-hmm. Australia, Mission Impossible 2, when that movie was made, Sydney was flooded with the scenes there, and so I think part of the goal of this film project, which we view as a holistic project to develop with Mongolia together, Mongolian cast and crew working with Hollywood cast and crew. I guess that's one way, a creative way maybe, trying to figure out how to help.
To share Mongolian story with the world audience.
Yes, and then bring them here.
Fantastic. That's a fantastic project. I wish you all the success.
Thank you.
And then hope one day we will be seeing, your project on a large screen.
Yeah. I always view it as our project, develop it with Mongolia. But yeah, we'll see where it goes. But very nice. Well, it's been so wonderful to have all this time with you. It was really nice to get to know you in this atmosphere, and kind of the person behind the vice minister. Whatever we can do to help support what you're doing, certainly we want to do our part. So. Mm-hmm.
And then also so great to hear your own personal story. I think it's very interesting to hear your external perspective with internal 22 years of experience. I mean, I think it's a very unique and actually great to hear your story, and thank you for sharing.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it.